Cultural developments in the post-Mauryan period, they have been a focus area for examiners, and if you see last 7-8 papers, we have been getting study questions on these areas. So if you actually look at this is the time when we had very clear development of art and sculpture that had come up, and there are three schools of art which have shaped Indian artistic traditions over a period of time in the subsequent times. The first one is called Gandhara School of Art. This has appeared in examination more than twice in the recent years. The second one is Madura School of Art, and the third one is Amaravati School of Art. And if you see the details, they are very interesting. Gandhara School of Art was called so because it developed in and around Gandhara, which is in the northwestern frontier of Indian subcontinent, and this was patronized by Indo-Greeks. Indo-Greeks are the first to come to India, as I have mentioned, after Alexander, right? So the School of Art has also been called Indo-Greek School of Art because of the predominant features of Greek style in this, and the features of this school are very interesting. Friends, you should remember this was the first school that had produced the image of Buddha. This is called Buddhist iconography. In the sculptural terminology, iconography is the way in which things are crafted. The first school of art that portrayed Buddha's statue or sculpture, Buddha's image, was Gandhara School of Art. And there are certain features for Gandhara School of Art. It is also called Greco-Roman because some Roman features are also there in this. First of all, because all the sculptures are only of Buddha, we have to see how Buddha has been depicted in stone. Buddha is shown as having curly hair, and he is shown as having a muscular body. See, generally sages in India are always weak. They don't focus on eating, they don't focus on body or beauty care or handsomeness or whatever. But the Greek concept is totally different. The Greek concept of handsomeness is totally different from what we see. That's why Greek male bodies are generally portrayed in a very a strong manner, muscular manner. So the focus on male strength is very much visible in Greek sculpture. That is also showing in the depiction of Buddha. Buddha is shown as having a muscular body, muscles with strong delineation of muscles. For example, Buddha doesn't look like a monk or sannyasi. He looked like 8-pack or 16-pack or 6-pack, but certainly not in a family pack. Okay, so that's an important point you should remember, friends. Then another important aspect is that Buddha is also shown as having a folded shawl, which is called transparent drapery on his shoulders. That is the third important feature of Gandhara School of Art. The fourth feature of Gandhara School is that Buddha is either in seated or standing position. The mudras, the postures of Buddha have been called as Dhyana Mudra, where Buddha closes his eyes and do meditation like this. Then we have Abhaya Mudra, Buddha standing or sitting and preaching kind of thing. And the third is Bhumi Sparsa Mudra. That means Buddha is seen seated as showing his thumb pointed towards the ground like this. Okay, so this is called Bhumi Sparsa Mudra because later Buddhist mythology says that Buddha wanted the earth to be a witness to the kind of meditation he was doing without any disturbances. So that is one important. Three more postures I told you, three mudras. Jnana Mudra, Abhaya Mudra and Bhumi Sparsa Mudra. These are the three important points you need to know. Then Buddha is generally mostly standard, but seated and reclining Buddhas are also not totally rare, but mostly they are standard. And we have the best examples for Gandhara school are from Bamiyan in Afghanistan. There were many Buddha statues that have come up which were in the Indo-Greek and subsequent periods, but all these were destroyed by Taliban because they say iconography is against Islam. Okay, so unfortunately heritage was lost, but Gandhara sculptures, the best example we used to find in Gandhara region, that is Bamiyan in Afghanistan. Of course, there are museums, some of the pieces are preserved in museum. So friends, the Buddhist sculpture art has become very prominent in this Gandhara school of art. It is also called Buddhist school of art because it produced Buddha's image for the first time. It is also called Indo-Greek school of art because it has a combination of Greek features and Indian themes. It is said that a Gandhara sculptor had Greek hands but Indian heart. That means his style is Greek, but themes, Buddha is very much Indian. Buddha is an ingredient part of Indian culture. So if a Greek style is used to portray the Buddha in an Indian cultural asset, that's why it is called Indo-Greek school of art. And a Gandhara artist or sculpture had Greek hands because his style is Greek but Indian heart. That is how we should understand. So friends, another important point is that the Gandhara school of art had a huge legacy. It kicked off lot of interest in image worship or image making in India, so that by Guptan time we have very strong tendency of idolatry or image worship in Indian culture and religion. So the credit for producing the first image of Buddha and also the credit for promoting the very idea of producing images in the subsequent times, they came up in Brahminical deities, then Jain Tirthankars or whatever, but the inspiration was Gandhara school. Another point about Gandhara school is that the quality of stone or granite used was very good and it had a very better finish. So these are the fundamental aspects that you should remember about Gandhara school. You can get a 15 marker or 12.5 or 10 marker question by saying that this is actually what are the main features of Gandhara school of art? Can Gandhara school of art be called as Indo-Greek school of art or Buddhist school of art? Or simply what are the salient features of Gandhara school of art? Like that the questions can come. In fact, it has been asked almost 3 times so far in the last 5-6 years. Okay, so then the next important aspect is Mathura school of art. This was patronized by Kushans, and reached its peak in the time of Kanishka. The special feature of Mathura school of art is that if Gandhara school was only essentially Buddhist, it did not produce anything other than Buddha's images. Mathura school of art is broad-based, Brahminical, apart from Buddhist, Brahminical and Jain sculptures or images have also been produced. So it was more broad-based as far as the thematic representation is concerned. Then it is also secular. The secular iconography or secular sculpture has also started with Mathura school of art. There is a village called Math, M-A-T, Math. Remember this? There is a village called Math. Here, a factory of Mathura style sculptures have been discovered dating to Kanishka's period, and there is also a statue of Kanishka, a headless statue. The head is not there. Then you might ask me, if head is not there, how do you know that it is Kanishka? The name is written, so there is no problem. Kanishka's statue was standing in an authoritative position with a long overcoat and shoe and a sword hanging to its side. So this shows that very authoritative position depiction. That's why, friends, we should say that the secular iconography has started with the Mathura school of art, and it had become more broad-based. And Mathura school had subsequently influenced the whole iconography of Indian culture in the period to come. This was produced and patronized by Kushans. Okay, in Madura region in UP, that's why it's called Madura School of Art. And the third one is Amaravati School of Art. The Amaravati School of Art had come come up in Amaravati and Nagarjunakonda region of present Andhra Pradesh. This is the youngest of all these things, patronized by Kushans, Satvans as well as Ikshwakus, who were a local dynasty that ruled later. So Madura School of Art, if it is more broad-based, even Amaravati is also showing increasing influence of Brahminical portrayal in Buddhist art. You know, the serpent images are very popular. If you visit Nagarjunakonda and Amaravati, you find lot of serpent images. You know, a folded serpent like this, and this is a clear indication of the influence of the Naga cult, which is Aktatanas are local. And a special feature of Amaravati School of Art is that there is also Amaravati Stupa, the life tales from Buddha, the life stories, main events from Buddha are depicted in stone. This sculptural representation of Buddha's life tales we don't find anywhere, either in Gandhara or in Madura. So that's the special feature of Amaravati School of Art. Whether when Buddha was in the womb of his mother, Maya Devi, she got a dream in which she had seen a white elephant, and it's a good omen. For example, if tonight you see white elephant, you can safely assume that you will get top rank in the UPSC. Very powerful, good omen. Okay. Anyway, so the sculptural depiction shows that. Then second, Buddha's birth at Lumbini, and third, he seeing 4 great sights, whether it was a old man, sick man, dead body, or monk. Then Buddha leaving the home, which is Mahavir Nishkramana. Then Buddha attaining bliss, that is Nirvana, Mahaparinirvana, and Buddha's first sermon, that is Dharmachakra Pravartana, and Buddha's final blowing out, that is Mahaparinirvana. All these are showed in sculptural depiction, which is really very special feature, very interesting feature of Amaravati school. However, friends, the quality of stone that was used in Amaravati school was not so good, not so great as it was in Gandhara and Madura schools, but it was not their defect. The kind of granite that was available locally is also that. There is also some images with the limestone that were there in Amaravati. So friends, this is the 3 schools of art. Now what do they represent? They represent very clear emergence of sculptural styles and schools of art with specific features, and all these fused together, combined together after the post-Mauryan period, that is Guptan period, to evolve into a pan-Indian art and architectural traditions. So these are very, very important for the development of art and architecture in India. In fact, we see a continuous thread from Mauryan art and architecture, Gandhara school, Madura, Amaravati, then eventually Guptan art and architecture. Of course, we did have school of art and architecture in Harappa, but that has ended, so we have to treat it separately. So friends, the confluence of Gandhara, Madura and Amaravati schools created a pan-Indian art and architectural traditions by Guptan time. That's why these 3 are very, very important. I expect separate questions also individually on especially on Gandhara, going by the previous examination trends. Either you can get a separate question on Gandhara because we have more features and it is the first of the 3, or subsequently you can be asked a overall question on what are the different schools of art that came up between 2nd century BC and 3rd century AD without mentioning the word of the post-Mauryan period. So this is one I expect you to remember carefully. The next important aspect is also literature. When we say culture, religion we have already seen in the previous session. Now let us see the art and architecture. We have already seen that. As far as literature is concerned, friends, this is a very good period for the growth of Sanskrit, because from the 1st century AD onwards, when we had Buddhism getting divided into Hinayana and Mahayana, and Mahayana Buddhists had taken over the Sanskrit, use of Sanskrit. In fact, this is the period when we have a new style of Sanskrit writing. That is Avadana style, came up by Vasumitra and Ashwagosha, who wrote a book called Sundara Nandana. This is also time when Dharmasastra, Manu Dharmasastra came up for the first time. That was also in Sanskrit. And apart from this, The Prakrit language is also continuing. Shatavahana period, we have a king called Hala, the 17th king of Shatavahanas. He wrote a book called Gada Saptasati. Gada Saptasati. This is in Prakrit. This is in Prakrit. We have another writer called Gunadcha. Gunadcha wrote a book called Brihat Kada, which is actually a collection of about different scripts, and this is called Devil's script. This is written in Devil's script, which is actually called Paisachik Prakrit. Because it's a combination of Prakrit, many Prakrit scripts and all others, and this is important as far as the Sanskrit and Prakrit is concerned. In the Deep South, a very interesting development has happened, that is called Sangam literature. When we are discussing political conditions of the post-Mauryan period, I said in the Deep South we have Chola, Chera, Chola and Pandya, who are the ancient Tamil dynasties, and this is the period when the Tamil literature, ancient Tamil literature got compiled, and that is called Sangam literature, because this is supposed to have happened in the confluence of three poets, assembly of three poets, three Sangams, where thousands of poets had participated, and this is called Sangam literature. So what is the Sangam literature? Again, there were questions in the previous examination from the Sangam literature segment, so we have to be careful. So let us see what is the Sangam literature and what are the important aspects about it. Okay, right? So friends, let's talk about the Sangam literature. So this is the ancient Tamil literature that is available down to us till today, and the meaning of Sangam actually means a college of poet, means a college or assembly or conference, assembly of poets, Tamil poets. And according to Tamil tradition, there were three Sangams that were held. Of course, some of them are partly mythical, but some of them are real. The three Sangams are, at Madurai, Kapatapuram, and Tel Madurai. These are the three places. Almost all are the same. The names are different because we are talking about different historical periods. Madurai, Kapatapuram, and Tel Madurai. These are the three places where the Tamil Sangams are supposed to have held. And friends, it is important that you will remember, that his earliest Sangam is very mythological. It is said that only gods and others had attended this, and we do not have any proper historical information about the first Sangam. The second Sangam or the second poet is supposed to be partly mythical, partly historical, but the third Sangam is definitely historical, which has happened in this period in the the 2nd century BC to 3rd century AD. So basically, it is to be understood that these provide the basis for the whole idea of Tamil, ancient Tamil literature. We have a variety of classification of this Tamil literature that is available. The earliest Tamil text is supposed to be Agathyam. It's a Tamil grammar text. Agathyam is a book supposed to have been written by Agastya, who is one of the first writers to have been participated in the first Sangam, along with the gods and sages. And this is the earliest Tamil grammar, and which is not available, of course. The second important thing is Tolkappiyam, who claims to be a disciple of Agastya, and this is written by Tolkappiyar, who is the writer. He is so as of now the earliest extant Tamil grammar is Tolkappiyam. We also have a lot of other Tamil literature that is produced at this point of time. You know, in fact, we have the 18 anthologies. We have texts like Pattu Pattu, Pattu Pattu is Tamil word which is translating into English. And more importantly, apart from this, we have 3 epics, Tamil epics. You know, 3 Tamil epics are there. Originally there are supposed to be 5 epics, but only 3 are available now. That is Silapadigram by somebody called Illango Adigal. Sorry, normal cough only, no corona cough. Silapadigram is written by a person called Illango Adigal. Okay, then we have the second one is that is Manimekalai. I write it clearly. Manimekalai is by somebody called Satana. Third one is Jivaga Chintamani. Which is by Tirukkadeva. These are called 3 epics which are available now, extant now, but originally they are supposed to be 5 epics, 2 are lost in time. Let me talk about the subject content of these books because this is how the previous questions have appeared. What kind of importance, the significance that the Sangam literature has in terms of social and academic conditions, how do they reveal the life and times of the Tamil culture or Deep South at this point of time. These are the questions that can be asked. So friends, listen, Silapadigram is a very interesting story. It is the story of a merchant, very rich merchant, who is called Kovalam. Okay, K-O-V-A-L-A-N, Kovalam, and his wife is Kannangi, K-A-N-N-A-N-G, Kannangi, and of course the other woman is also available. You know, so her name is Madhavi. So we have 3 players in this. One is the protagonist, who is Kovalam, almost like a hero, though he dies. Then the second is Kovalam's wife, Kannangi. The third one is the lady love of Kovalam, who is called Madhavi, who is a leading courtesan. The story goes on like this. You know, you have this Kovalam, who is very rich and very attractive. He falls for this dancer or courtesan called Madhavi. Even though the wife is very devoted, she is a so-called Pativrata. Pativrata, remember this. You know, she is very much adoring her husband, very much devoted, but husband falls for other women. This is the basic plot of this story. However, while these 3 are having this kind of issues, the extramarital affair and this wife upset, all the problems are normally there. There is parallelly, we have a king and a thief, you know, commits a theft in the royal palace itself, in the harem itself. He takes away a jeweled anklet which is called Silapadigram. The meaning of Silapadigram is actually jeweled anklet, you know, very gold studded bangle kind of thing. Okay, but the thief is caught because, you know, it is very insulting. It is like some pickpocket coming to police station and, you know, pickpocketing SP's purse. It looks very odd, na? So king was naturally upset. He caught the thief and said, "How dare you? How dare you to steal my own chief prince bangle in the royal harem?" Then the thief simply said, "No sir, I didn't do anything. Kovalan asked me to do." Kovalan is a rich merchant who keeps traveling, export into diamonds and all that. He goes on voyages. So this looked perfect. Oh, he wanted to sell this outside. So simply, without any inquiries, the king has called the merchant, who is the hero, that is husband of Karnangi, and he executes him on the spot. But the reason is, the real thing that has happened is, there was absolutely no connection between Kovalan and the thief. Just to escape, the thief said Kovalan's name, and because he's so popular, it's like if I do some comment, I say, oh, Amitabh Bachchan asked me to do. Or okay, some CM asked me to do. Some other politician asked me to do. Like that, just is all lies to get away from the issue. So, this is known to wife, Karnangi, who is not normal wife, Pativrata. Okay, so she comes and she actually curses the king that, see, you have done a miscarriage of justice. You have done a miscarriage of justice because, my husband was innocent. And she said, if I were a devout wife, she cursed, invoking her fidelity and invoking her dedication to her husband, and said, if I were a very devout wife, your entire kingdom will perish, you will not get any rains and all that. And she immolates herself in the full court. Okay, and this is the essence of the story. Now that king realizes his mistake, and of course all the kingdom has no rains and all that. But the lady, Karnangi, who had immolated herself because husband's death, who had cursed the king so powerful that all her curse came true, she is now worshipped as a goddess. From that time, this is called Patini cult, Karnangi cult or Patini cult. This is the story. This is the story, okay, of Silapadigram. Now the next story, then we will get back to the importance of these texts and the information they provide. The next epic is Manimekhalai. Now Manimekhalai is nothing but the daughter of Kovalan and Madhavi. It's like Bahubali 2. Nowadays all movies are Sadak 2, Bahubali 2, like that all movies are coming twice, right? In the similar way, Manimekhalai was actually a sequence by Satyanar for the first epic, and she actually is a very beautiful girl, like all heroines are beautiful. She is also a very beautiful girl, and entire leading men in the town are after her. Just even if she looks, people are shivering and falling down. That kind of beauty she has. Okay. Anyway, and but eventually she gets frustration. She develops a strange philosophical attitude and becomes a Buddhist nun. Mark my words. Eventually, the most beautiful lady, dancer, young girl who can dictate terms to all leading men in the town with just a smile of her, she develops frustration and philosophy and becomes a nun, Buddhist nun. See, Buddhism in Tamil Nadu. We are talking about Buddhism in Tamil Nadu now. So that is the second story. The third epic is Jivaga Chintamani. Jivaga Chintamani is supposed to be a king in the story. He is so powerful, he has conquered all the world. That means 2-3 towns there. It's just hyperbola. He is very powerful. He can conquer the entire world. He conquers, but after that, he develops philosophy. What is the use of all this money? What is the use of having properties? Aparigraham, Asteyam, non-stealing, not having property, Jain symbols. You remember? Jain philosophies, Jain principles. So, he leaves everything and finally becomes a Jain monk. It's like a Rajnikant movie. Even Tamil philosophy is very interesting. Even Rajnikant movies, I have seen most of the Rajnikant movies. I'm a die-hard fan of Rajnikant. Okay? See, I have seen long back, we have Narasimha, which is very popular, of course. Then we have Muthu, we have Arunachalam, recently Linga, right? All these movies, you just see, he is a very rich man. He donates everything to the people. And in the end, he will walk on a rainy night to a bridge ha ha ha, smiling and walking. Everybody will be crying, don't go like that. But he leaves everything and becomes a pauper, becomes a poor man. That means sacrificing. You achieve everything, but in the end of the day, you sacrifice all that. That is the philosophy of Jainism, So that is how you actually see the philosophical bent of mind in Tamil culture, which is still very interestingly existing. So these are the three epics which are called Tamil epics. Friends, the purpose is the historically if you analyze, the three epics actually talk about lot of social and economic conditions of this time, because there are references in the Silapadigram. If you take, there are references to ports, because the merchant is exporting Kaveri Patnam, which is called Puhar. What are being exported? What kind of silks are being sold? What kind of cotton textiles are popular? What kind of diamonds are being sold and imported? Very beautiful details we get. So the social and economic life. Imagine how dancing girls, Madinakla, you see how dancing girls and courtesans played a role in the society. At the same time, Silapadigram also talks about the Aryan influence spreading to the south. Where do we hear Pativrata concept for the first time? Ramayana, right? Yes or no? It is Ramayana. Sita is supposed to be the ideal wife in Indian culture according to Aryan tradition. Now the same kind of the chaste wife, even the husband is a Casanova, even the husband is a debaucher, the wife should be very proper. Wife should be very kind of Pativrata kind of thing. Continue to worship and cry for husband. This kind of tendency is in the Pativrata wife, Pativrata syndrome. The Pativrata syndrome, as far as woman's position is concerned, this is available in Ramayana for the first time. So from the later Vedic age onwards, Ramayana, the Aryan culture was gradually spreading to the south, and by Sangam period, the complete spread of Aryan culture, Aryan values of social values and cultural values are seen in Silapadigram in the chaste wife cult of Kannangi. That is the analysis. That is the analysis you are supposed to write, understand and write. So, this is the question that has come up in the earlier exams also. What kind of importance, what kind of how do you use the Tamil Sangam literature as a source of history? How do you analyze the trends in the culture at this point of time? That's very important. So, friends, this is how the Sangam literature, whether it is Tamil grammar, Agatyam or Tokapiyam, or then Pattu, anthologies. There are many other names which you may not need to remember, because the analysis is more important in the mains rather than the thing. And preliminary, you can also understand these names you have to remember. So, the last aspect about Tamil literature is that we also find a very strange classification of Tamil literature. One is called, Aham. Aham is about war. The theme of it is about war. Then we have something called Puram. Puram is actually about, Aham is about love and Puram is about war. Aham is myself, right? How I feel. Aham is about love, the theme of love. Puram is related to war and personal aggrandizement and all that. So, love poetry as well as war related poetry, these are two very popular, and in fact these are representing the Tamil ethos of that time, and they are very valuable passages of Tamil culture to Indian culture, friends. And another classification of Tamil literature is on the forms, geographical forms. For example, we have the emotions are compared with the geographical forms. If somebody is meeting his lady love, it is like a cultivated field, Marudam, everything is green, that's why life is more colorful. It's like Marudam, it is like a cultivated field. If you are expecting to meet your lady love, it is Nadal coast, where you are, you are just on a voyage, you are expecting to reach the coast and get down. That is kind of thing. If there is no love, nothing, life is hopeless and boring, no colorful, it is dry land. Mullai, Pallai, if it is somewhat nature related, it is hills. So whether it is dry land, cultivated field, Marudam or Nadal or Mullai, Pallai, all these geographical forms have been compared with the thematic representation of Tamil literature. This is also very special feature that you have to see. So friends, Sangam literature, you can expect a special question on that, and as you see, we have also devoted a good time for it, which is sufficient enough to equip yourselves to write about, to 150 to 250 words, whether it is 15 marks or 12.5 marks or 10 marks or even 20 marks also they may give, we don't know, right? Because the number of marks are very dynamically changing in the examination. So this is about the literature. So basically I just give a recap to you. Post-modern period cultural developments are very interesting. That is one, religion. We have enrichment of religion because Bhagavatism became popular, Mahayana Buddhism became popular, then Jainism was steady as always. Then as far as Saivism is concerned, that is also we have new sects. Then as far as art and architecture is concerned, we have Gandhara, Mathura and Amaravati schools, which I have explained to you. Coming to literature, Sanskrit literature, this was a good period of growth because Manu Dharma Shastra was written, and Mahayana writers taking over Sanskrit as a vehicle of writing, especially Sundaranandana, Ashwagosha, Vasumitra, all these people were writing. That has become a very good boost for Sanskrit. Puranas, remember, Puranas, the work on Puranas has also started at this point of time. There are 18 Puranas which are called Ashtadis Puranas. These got their final shape only during the Gupta period, but the work has started. Some of the Puranas like Yuga Purana and all that have Brahma, Bhagavata, Matsya, Vayu, Vishnu, Markandeya. These are some of the Puranas which work on started, but they got their final shape in the Gupta period. Then of course, Prakrit literature. Hala wrote Gada Saptasati in Prakrit and Gunarja wrote Bharat Gada in Paisachik Prakrit. Then Sangam literature we explained. So you can expect questions on art and architecture as well as literature in the examination, given the nature of marks that they are breaking into shorter questions. So I hope this is very clear to you, and you can practice these questions and write. Okay. So this is the most important development about art and architecture of the post-Mauryan period, that is 2nd century BC to 3rd century AD, and also the literary and other cultural developments. Religion I have briefly mentioned, but this is very important. Exam as far as UPSC civil services is concerned is very important. And of course Gandhara, Mathura, Amaravati schools are also important if you are preparing for group 1 of APPSC or TSPSC or UP group 1, Bihar group 1 or whatever. Okay. So this is how we need to understand this. The next important development we'll see as we go on.